Number 1. I lived in a handful of different apartment communities with my mum for the majority of my teenage years, some better than others. Incidentally, this occurred in the best of all of them. I was 16 at the time. There were a group of girls around 10 years old that looked to hang around and play volleyball together a lot. They hated me because I used to get with another kid and throw water balloons at them while they were playing. In hindsight, this was pretty creepy in itself, but at the time it was hilarious. Well, I'd probably be the last person they would ever visit. And one day, when I was playing GTA in the middle of the summer day, they came and knocked on my door. I was going to make a smart-ass comment, but they looked pretty distressed, so I asked them what was wrong. They told me there was a weird guy driving around near where they were hanging out a few times and wanted me to come by and check. I was the oldest kid in the complex, so it makes sense that they would come to me for this. We went and got my buddy, who was 14 at the time, and went over there. Well, they were right. We got over there, and there was this guy in an old truck still there, watching us approach. I was pretty fearless, so I flipped him off and started throwing a football with my friend for a while. The girls went back to playing volleyball. This is where it gets absolutely crazy. After about 10 minutes, the guy gets out and starts walking towards all of us. We decide to get the hell out of there, so we walk back towards my place. He follows. I tell everybody to book it, so we start running. He starts running behind us. At this point, I decide that I'm going to get my mum's gun and scare this guy away. So we beat him back to my apartment and lock the door. I get the gun, unloaded, total idiocy, and I go back outside to find that he's still waiting with a nasty look on his face. I look him dead in the eyes and tell him to get the fuck out of here and point the gun at him. He smiles, reaches into his belt and raises his own gun right back at me. It's at this point that I completely shit myself for the first time in this encounter. I know I can't fire. I went completely numb standing there, gun raised, for what felt like years. It was probably about 15 seconds, and neither of us said a word. After that eternity, he finally lowered his gun and walked away. We called the cops after this, but omitted the part about my gun, but they never found the guy. I have not pulled a gun on anyone else since then, thankfully. I was the neighborhood badass forever after that, but I absolutely did not want that designation. I didn't sleep for weeks. I can still clearly see the barrel of that dude's gun staring me down. I felt like the smallest dude in the world for those 15 seconds. Number 2. Okay, so a little backstory before I tell you one of the scary experiences of mine that happened during my second year security career from 2013 to 2015. I'm a 6'7" male in Australia. I'd like to think I'm a fairly tough and intimidating guy, but some of the stuff that used to go on at that mall that I used to work at the night shift for still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall I worked at was very, very large, probably the largest in my state, I'd say, and all the way up to about 8:30 PM, it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 would we manage to usher all of the stragglers out, and only at about 11 PM would all of the business owners have left. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure that there was no one sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. We didn't have guns or batons, only a can of mace that was very rarely used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by the 4 to 5 of us on shift at a time, and they would usually be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of security. This one night though, shit started getting really weird for me on the night shift. So I'd say it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court, eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the mall that had any light at night time due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off from the food courts and to some toilets. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I was immediately put on edge and I flicked on my torch flashlight without a moment of hesitation. I can remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 or 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the mall, the noise became louder and louder until I was at the end of the hallway and there was the toilet doors to the left and right of me. I could tell that the sound was coming from the female toilets though. I gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny little crack. The noise was now very clear and had me not scared but confused, and I yelled,
"Oi, who's in there?"
The noise quickly stopped. I paused a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear to God, I could hear breathing, low, male breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio.
"This is 123. I need help in food court bathrooms. I think someone is in here."
No response. This was really strange and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and now I was truly becoming quite alarmed.
"This is 123. Does anyone copy?"
Still no response. I can remember whispering to myself, what the actual fuck is going on? I again opened the door a tiny crack.
"Listen, mate,"
I said, sounding as intimidating as possible.
"If you don't fucking come out with your hands up, you're going to end up eating your teeth tonight. Do you want that?"
I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, now there was no noise at all. I yelled into the bathroom again.
"Okay, mate, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault. You will never walk again."
I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the female bathrooms? What was the metal noise? What the fuck is even happening? I very slowly opened the door and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the cubicles were open. Weird, but other than that, the room was totally empty. I was totally shitting myself about now. I was definitely losing it. I walked into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. Scared to the core, I let out a faint.
"This is some horror movie shit, eh? Come out."
When I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me, I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my torch on a fucking massive man, at least a head taller than me. Remember, I'm 6'7". He was Caucasian and at least in his 40s, with matte grey hair all over his forehead. He was in the middle of opening the door, but he stopped dead still in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty smile like a kid would when he gets caught stealing biscuits or some shit like that. I'm not gonna lie, I was scared. I froze. He lifted his finger up to his mouth. Shh. Before swinging the door open all the way and sprinting out with what looked like some type of small metal box in his hand. Turns out he was just behind the toilet door when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so fucking close to him and I didn't even fucking notice him. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. That was the last I saw of him. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and I got right on to telling my co-workers about my story. They collectively went pale when I told them what had happened. They all had similar stories, but none that were as much of a close shave as mine. I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around in a job like that. I needed help, and for some reason my radio fucked itself. How and why? Anyway, that's the end of story. Number 3. This happened 2 or 3 years ago, I believe. I'm really bad at remembering time frames, forgive me. So I would have been either 21 or 22 at the time. Here's a small amount of backstory first. I was diagnosed with narcolepsy when I was 16. It's not a huge deal, but sleep has always been an issue for me, whether it's insomnia or just nodding off at completely inappropriate times. I also typically ride the subway to and from my job, since traffic is super annoying to deal with, and the subway station is within walking distance of my apartment building anyway. I ended up working overtime that night, so obviously I got off work later than what I was used to. It was about 8:30 PM, so it was kind of dark out as I was making my way to the station. I was just casually making my way downtown, not walking particularly fast or anything, but I was indeed homebound. After a bit of walking, I can hear someone's footsteps behind me. I glance back to see a pretty normal looking guy about 10 feet behind me, staring at his phone. He looked to be around his mid to late 20s, was clean and was dressed up nicely. Not anything super fancy, but it was obvious he wasn't poor. I didn't think much of it and just assumed that he was another person walking home from work. After I noticed that he'd been right behind me for 2 blocks now, I decided to try changing up the route that I was going, just to make sure that nothing weird was going on. He could have been heading to the subway just like me, but I wanted to be safe. During the last block there, I purposely made an unnecessary turn that pretty much just led in a loop back around to the station rather than straight towards it, and he went right along with me. For some reason, most likely because I'm very stupid and lack decent reasoning abilities, I decided that turning around and talking to him was a good idea. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have done that, and once more, at it with my crappy reasoning abilities, I just straight up say, "Are you following me?" The guy stares at me for a moment before laughing and saying that he was so focused on what he was doing on his phone, he must have ended up accidentally tailing me. Because I'm quite gullible, I must have believed him on the spot, laughing and saying how I have done that exact same thing before. He then turns around and starts walking the opposite direction. I make it to the station safely, wait a little bit for the train to arrive, and then take my seat. It wasn't very crowded inside, probably because it was a weekday and was now somewhere around 9 PM. I headed straight for the seats that were off in the corner, away from the other people that were there. As I'm waiting for everyone to board so that the train can leave, guess who I see walk in? Yep, the guy who was following me earlier. As he walked in, he looked right at me and took a seat relatively far away from me. I didn't think much of it because he could have just been heading home as well. After a few minutes, I started getting really tired, and you guessed it, I accidentally fell asleep in my seat. I really need to start carrying raw coffee grounds with me or something. I couldn't have been asleep for more than 10 minutes or so before I woke up though, but when I did, it was the creepiest thing. The guy from earlier was now sitting directly across from me, and had his phone held in front of him, obviously taking pictures. He jumped a little when I sat up straight and proceeded with my very eloquent response of, "Whoa, what the?" Now, here comes the worst part. He didn't even try to hide that he was taking pictures of me, and instead, he looked me right in the eyes and smiled and said,
I'm sorry, you just looked so pretty sleeping."
I wasn't really sure how to respond to that, but was creeped out to the max and told him that he must delete the pictures that he took of me. He apologized and then tapped on his phone a few times. Looking back on it, I should have demanded that he show me his phone to prove it. He could have just faked it for all I know. I got up and moved to a different seat, but he just sat there staring and smiling at me the whole time. Luckily, he didn't try to follow me anymore after that. But what he said, in addition to him waiting until I was unconscious to move next to me and take pictures of me, still gives me major heebie-jeebies.